so we were listed in the right places on Twitch. For anybody that wanted to come in, it does look like we had a viewer there for a minute, but he popped off. He might not have realized I jumped off for a second. That's okay. Hopefully, we come back. I just notified people on Facebook that we'd be streaming. Uh, let's see here. Okay, watch a stream manager there. I want to put the stream manager on my phone too, just so that I can make sure to see if I'm in another window at the time. There you go. All right. Blow my nose real quick. There we go. Change the screen over here. Just a quick view first of the schedule. For those who don't know, my schedule of what's going on. Mondays and Wednesdays, I do nostalgia gaming from 10 to midnight Central Standard Time. That will sometimes be preempted if I am beta testing, because I am on the beta tests list for Fractured, the MMO. And so when I am doing that beta test, I'm taking as much extra streaming time as possible for that. So instead of nostalgia gaming and streaming older games, I'm streaming a new playtest during that time slot. But otherwise, 10 to midnight of stream games. Yesterday we streamed Ape Escape 2 from the PlayStation Now lineup. It was one of the games that you could download and then play, so that I was able to stream it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do tomorrow, but I'm willing to take suggestions. But yeah, from 10 to midnight. Then on Tuesdays, to like today, we have our RPG College open forum, which is what we're doing now, where we talk anything and everything role playing games, mainly focusing around the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons right now because it's the main game that's out and active. But if you want to talk other games, I've got quite a bit of experience. I've been running and playing these games for 42 years. And throughout the 80s, I played just about every game that came out. After my session's over at 8 o'clock ish, I might run over a little late. At 8:30, we will start simulcasting Left Wing Studios as they stream them playing a PlayStation game, um, like The Last of Us or Better Off Dead or something of that sort. Last of Us, I think, is what they've been streaming. And so you'll get to see Lurch and Left Claw, Angel, uh, joking around, having fun while they, blow up zombies and stuff. So that's always a lot of fun. And that'll go till 11 o'clock. So Tuesday's our busiest scheduled day. And then on Saturdays, if you come in, and we've got a brand new show. It's just had 2 episodes. This last week's was kind of slow. Week before that, I did have a random come in and ask me to do a silly song for them. It's called Quarantine Karaoke, even though I'll probably keep that name even after all quarantine is over with. It's my variety show where I sing karaoke to YouTube channels. I also play YouTube videos. Um, and it's a variety show, so I might come up with other things to talk about. Like I showed the videos for the up and coming PlayStation 5 preview. I showed a Fractured preview. I've showed the D&D Beyond promo trailer. And I like to throw silly videos in there for people to watch, stuff like Weird Al Yankovic or the Merkins, just to have fun. But one of the things I do is in the bent of the karaoke thing is if somebody gives me a request to sing, I'll sing just about anything, even if I don't know it. I'll first play it so I can hear it once, and then I'll try to sing it if I can find it as a karaoke version. and I'll sing just about anything for you. The first episode, we had somebody come in and have me sing a Gummy Bears song, and it's not the one from the old cartoon show. And after doing it, I went through it, and it was a lot of fun. I do not get embarrassed. I have no shame. So ask me to do something silly. Ask me to sing "I'm Too Sexy." I'll do it. So that's what we do during quarantine karaoke. And then throughout the rest of the week, I will spontaneously broadcast additional times, especially when Fractured is being in alpha test, because then I'll be trying to get as much alpha testing time in as possible. But other than that, I will sometimes stream me playing a game or do an additional episode more focused of RPG College based on a specific topic or uh, things like that. It might even come back in with another quarantine karaoke type of variety episode. You never know. Um, I have also done one foodie show for my foodie nerd. I have not put it on the schedule yet, but foodie nerd is going to be focused on the culinary um, culture here in Springfield. And my first show was 10 of the restaurants I definitely think that you shouldn't miss in the Springfield area if you like good food. One of the things I think people forget, a lot of us nerds are also chefs, and I want to cater to the entire nerd community. So I'm going to talk food, I'm going to talk karaoke, I'm going to talk cosplay, I'm going to talk role playing games, and I'm going to talk, of course, video games and board games and things like that too. So welcome aboard, anybody who's here. Does look like we've got one viewer, but then again, I always have one phantom viewer. They never speak, so I'm not sure if it's somebody or if it's just. Uh, I mean, because I mean, there are times when I have zero, so it's not like I always have it, so it's enough to where I think I have a viewer, but they never say anything. So I'm not absolutely sure if I have a viewer or not. But I'm going to talk as if I do, and if I get, uh, if for most parts I will transfer these shows within 7 to 10 days over to YouTube. So I'll talk like there's people here, even if there isn't. We don't have an open topic as of yet. I do open forum on my Tuesday shows. I generally don't have a preset topic. I will sometimes introduce one if nothing comes forward and talk about it. But please come on in if you have questions about playing Dungeons and Dragons or role playing games. Excuse me. Or DMing Dungeons and Dragons or other role playing games. Yeah, just general questions that might work for multiple games. Come on in if you want to talk about the history of role playing games. If you want to talk about rules as written, rules as intended, building house rules, building game worlds. I'm a bit of a writer, so I'll help you work on building your game world, because that kind of crosses between gaming and actual writing. A lot of DMs are fancy themselves as writers. Some of them even make a name for themselves at it. Raymond Feist, who wrote the Kingdom of Calamar campaign setting for Dungeons and Dragons, wrote several books in the Calamar universe. Universes, there's a couple of them actually, because he had the Rift Wars saga, which talked about a rift between the two universes, between a the Tsurani Empire and Midkemia, which was in a more medieval fantasy universe. One was more of a Asian fantasy kind of universe, very inspired by Eastern type of medieval feudal Japan type. And then Midkemia, which was very much the European medieval universe, and they came together. And one universe is of course extremely low on metals. That would be the Eastern one, and so they were of course raiding the European one for their metals, which were much more plentiful. I mean, they threw away metals that were massively valuable as far as the Midkemians were concerned. So, I mean, as far as the Tsurani were concerned. So, and that's just one example of a D&D DM who became an author, and he actually played with several other authors in his game, because he played with Joel Rosenberg, who wrote the Guardians of the Flames series, among others. Janie Wirtz, who wrote the Tyranny series, a more sci-fi universe. So gamers actually do become authors, and as we've seen in modern times, they become writers, directors, actors. Vin Diesel, of course, the 30th anniversary edition of Dungeons and Dragons. The foreword, excuse me, was written by Vin Diesel. Vin Diesel's been playing for a long time. The last Witch Hunter character was kind of based on one of his D&D characters, and then they reverse based it when they did a celebrity D&D with Matt Mercer. The Blood Hunter class that Mercer made up for his campaign setting was based around the Witch Hunter, and so again they reverse engineered and made a character again, uh, so that he could play that character in a one shot with Matt Mercer and gang. So you have actors and everything. Speaking of which, this Thursday, or is it Thursday? Let me see. What's today's? Yes, this Thursday, Friday, and Saturday is the D&D live show on Twitch, and they'll be playing a lot of games. They'll be DMing for celebrities like Matthew Lillard and Deborah Ann Wall and such. And I'll probably, even if we have time, play the little promo video for that today, just to show you what's going on if we don't have anything else in our topics. But that's a stream you're going to want to get into. Every year, D&D does one D&D live stream to introduce the new season of their Adventures League, the new campaign, the new adventure book that comes out. So the new um, main quest book that people are going to be going through in the new season. And this is when they introduce other new product type information. This is where Beetle and Grimm will talk about their new big premium box set, their platinum edition of whatever the new campaign is, which is of course Matthew Lillard's company. Matthew Lillard, of course, we know, who played serial killer in Hackers. He was the voice of Shaggy, and then later played the character Shaggy in the two live action Scooby Doo movies. He's not Shaggy in the new animated, but he's been there pretty much. He took over for Casey Kasem as Shaggy, but he's been in a lot of different movies. Um, so you'll recognize him. He was in 13 Ghosts. He's just been in quite a few movies. He's been also a guest on TV shows. He's been one of the serial killers in Criminal Minds. Uh, just to name a few things that he's been. Deborah Ann Wall, of course, like I said, she's going to be at the D&D Live presentation, and she played Bill's protege vampire on True Blood, um, and she also played Karen Page in the Netflix Daredevil and Punisher series. So the Netflix Marvel series, she was Karen Page, so you might know her from that as well. And she also runs a D&D stream called Relics and Rarities, I believe is the name of it. So she's a celebrity gamer. I'm not sure if Joe Manganiello is going to be there this time, but he has been there in the past. We all know Joe Manganiello from Magic Mike and True Blood and Rampage and other movies of that nature. And he's got a bunch of new movies coming up. Still doesn't look like we got anything more than the one quote unquote phantom viewer here. I'm not sure. So I'm not really diving into the subject matter yet, but just kind of telling you some general announcements and things right now. But the purpose of this show is to talk role playing games, to help you out if you have questions, concerns, or do you have trouble dealing with a troublesome player. Is your game going off the rails? Is there a rule that you need clarification on or a new interpretation of? Because rules as written doesn't always fit everybody's campaign, and rules as intended is not always as obvious. And even then, the first rule of D&D is it's the DM's world, so every rule in the book is only a guideline, and the DM can choose to interpret, keep, or discard any rule they want, as long as they stay consistent and fair. Got a bit of a nose tickle is all. But anyway, we're here for the RPG College for this purpose, is to actually stream and help people with D&D based things. I'm still just getting my legs under me as a Twitch broadcaster. I've only been doing it since April, since quarantine started. I finally started doing a little bit of this. I did do 2 streaming panels at Virtual VisionCon this year because, of course, they didn't have a live VisionCon, so we did 2 streaming panels, and those came out relatively well. Very well attended and great comment feedback. They're based on a couple of YouTube videos I have saved that I'd done individual Twitch shows on before the panels, but the actual panels themselves were recorded as well, and they can be found on VisionCon's YouTube. The first was building engaging NPCs, which I think a lot of DMs want help with. I think they've all got the capability of doing it. It's just sometimes they need a little nudge in the right direction. First off, you do not have to be a master of voices to be the perfect DM. I mean, Matt Mercer, bless his heart, is one of the greatest DMs on streaming right now, but he is a professional voice actor. Do not expect to be Matt Mercer and run all your games like his games. He's not only a actor and voice actor, but his players are all actors and voice actors and directors and stuff. So don't expect your table to run like his table runs. They're not scripted. They're definitely not scripted, but they're still actors and improvisation experts. And so you're going to get a little bit different quality game from them than you are from, your friends. And that's fine. But yeah, building interesting NPCs is a big part of the DM toolkit. And so I did that. And then the other stream I did at VisionCon was building encounters and talking about the underlying assumptions of the challenge rating system. Because a lot of people you see online in Reddit and Facebook complaining that the challenge rating system in 5th edition doesn't work, or the challenge rating system in 3rd edition doesn't work, or whatever. And it didn't work in a lot of editions because it has certain basic underlying assumptions, and almost no table corresponds to those assumptions. Okay, the first challenge rating system was introduced in 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. I'm going to go off on this tangent because we don't have anybody here asking questions right now. If you want to hear about something different, please jump on and ask questions. Otherwise, I'm fine to rehash some of this information. But the first challenge rating system started in 3rd edition. Before that, there was no challenge rating system. There was a very loose system where you could call the level of a monster their hit die total. And that's how Gary Gygax kind of built it. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson put it together, and they basically called the level of a monster their number of hit dice. Didn't matter what size hit dice it was, the number of their hit dice was their level for estimating. But they didn't worry about in OD&D basic through all those what they call BECMI or classic D&D. So there's OD&D, there's classic D&D, which is basic expert encounter masters, immortals, or BECMI. And then there was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons that came out really 1980s when you really saw it was right at the very tail end of 79 when they first really got the books out. So the D&D Advanced came out, and then it went into 2nd edition. So you went from OD&D all the way to 2nd edition without any challenge rating system because they didn't care about balancing encounters. What I mean by they didn't care is that was not the importance of the game. The game was not about balancing encounters. You encountered something in the game, you knew back then that running was a viable option. You did not automatically assume that the DM never sent you up against anything you couldn't handle. That wasn't true. DM often sent you up against things you couldn't handle. That was kind of the point. Gary Gygax was well known for overwhelming players. He'd send first level players against dragons. Um, of course, also the older editions did not have the focus on balance in the game itself as much. The various different classes and stuff were not balanced within a level, they were balanced across the levels. So in the beginning of the game, the melee characters were better as far as able to handle combat and stuff because they could swing the big sword and wear the big armor and have the more hit points, which is what it took to survive. Where the spellcasters had one, maybe two spells at the lower levels, so they had to husband their resources a little bit and work until the mid-range levels, and then finally at the high levels, it was a reverse, and it was a thing called often called the linear fighter quadratic wizard effect, because the fighter built linearly their power base. The wizards and the spellcasters, their power went up in a quadratic fashion. So by the time you get to the high levels, the wizards were quite literally wielding phenomenal cosmic power. You know, they were the genie. They could do anything. They had wish spells and massive fireballs and doppelgangers and contingencies and stuff. And the fighters were relegated to being their scroll caddies. They carried around their scrolls, and if the fighters and stuff didn't get really great magic items, they couldn't compete with the wizards at all. So they were very magic item dependent to even stay in the competition with the glass cannons that were the wizards, because the wizards still had low hit points. So they were still easily killed. So the fighters played bodyguard for the wizard while the wizard went and killed everything, um, kind of thing. The fighter's job was just to keep them off the wizard long enough or to soak up damage while the wizard took care of business. And so that wasn't always considered fair or fun for the entire table. So in third edition, they introduced a challenge rating system, and they started introducing the concept of balance in the game. And so they built the balance game, but there's certain underlying preconceptions of the challenge rating system. First off, most games of Dungeons and Dragons they'd found were most comfortably played with about 3 to 5 adventurers in a party. And that fits because there were 4 basic archetypes of classes. So if your average party was 4, then you could have plus or minus 1, so 3 to 5 made a lot of sense. Because your average archetype was a fighter type, a cleric type, a back then thief type, but we changed it to rogue in third edition, and a wizard type was what they were called. In MMOs, you'll see this reflected, although they'll use other role names in MMOs. In MMOs, they're going to call you a support guy or a buffer healer guy. In fourth edition D&D, they renamed that to a leader. But they were the ones that used the role where they supported everybody else. They healed people. They put buffs on people. They put debuffs on the bad guys. They went around and facilitated other people fighting, but weren't necessarily always all in on the fighting part of it. So there was that person. That was the quote unquote cleric's role in the game. That evolved from the cleric was the leader or buffer. Um, the tank is what you'll hear in MMOs, or defender, which is what they named it in 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. 4th edition went back to focusing on the roles a little bit. It kind of borrowed from MMOs and took the roles that had already been assumed and just kind of assigned them. But you'd use a defender or a tank. When you go in MMO, your tank is your guy that's got massive armor and massive hit points so that he can soak up a bunch of damage. And his job was to go in and take attacks and have all the enemies focus on attacking them while the other more squishy characters got the job done. Um, And they could do some damage. I mean, tanks could do some damage, but they were not the damage dealers. They were the damage soakers. They usually had an ability that would pull aggro. In a computer game, they would pull aggro. In fourth edition, they developed an ability called a mark that you could put on something to make him make that enemy either make them attack you instead of other people, or make them take penalties for attacking somebody other than you. It was a marking ability, and that was a roll. And then there is the controller, is what they called it in fourth edition. In MMOs, you're going to call them an AoE. You're going to call them a blaster, and it evolved from the wizard. They're the ones that do the big area of effect spells. They're crowd control. They can do things like enchant areas of the game to lock them down, to make them harder to traverse, to put walls between you and the bad guys as protection, things of that nature. So that was your controller, is what they called it in fourth edition. And like I said, online they called them blasters or AoEs. And then finally you had your rogue, and your rogue in older editions was your skill monkey. He was the one that did all of your little ancillary out of combat skilly stuff, and then he was also your dexterity type fighter. He was the one that did the sneak attacks, killed from behind from the shadows and stuff. Well, he evolved in MMOs. They called him a DPS, or damage per second person. He's the one that did the most damage out there, and usually also had the best mobility. He could move around the battlefield without getting hurt necessarily, jumping in and out of shadows, and then he could do massive amounts of damage with single attacks because he had sneak attack, or he had hunter's mark, or he had warlock's hex, because there's several different ones. And he was called your DPS guy, or in fourth edition they named him as your striker. He was the one that went and did the massive damage, where the tank took the damage, the striker did the damage. And so he would go out and do that. And your rangers were strikers, your rogues were strikers, depending on your builds. Things like sorcerers and warlocks were strikers. Even your barbarian was technically a striker, not necessarily a tank, but you could build him as a tank. And the thing in fourth edition is they assigned a specific role to each class, but each class also had like a secondary role that they could build towards. And you could literally build them towards any of the four roles if you really wanted to. It was just kind of hard on some cases. Like, it was really hard to build a wizard tank, and it was really hard to build a fighter controller. So you didn't see a lot of that. But in some ways, you could do it. I don't know why I'm yawning so much. I slept all dang day. Anyway, that might be why I'm yawning so much. So those are the four basic roles. So having a party of 3 to 5 characters, which is what we diverged from, meant that was a good average, because then you could have one of each role and a spare, or you could have the 3 most important roles and go in a little under strength and still be considered okay. So 3 to 5 characters was what a lot of tables had gravitated towards. So the challenge rating system was built upon that 3 to 5 player assumption. A challenge rating was not based per player, it was based on your entire party of 3 to 5 players. So that's one. 2, your challenge rating system was based on the kind of default character generation method with the most control. So although a lot of people consider dice rolling as the default method of generating characters, because there was a point buy system, or a standard array system in effect, because it was really kind of introduced in third edition as options, and because these represented more of a median level of what roles would come out to be, that was the assumption for the challenge rating system, is that you're going to have characters with ability scores in that median level range. And then in fourth edition, they made that the default method, was the standard array, although you could roll or you could do a point buy system. In 4th edition, the default method was a standard array. And then in 5th edition, they've kind of like left it up to each table which one they wanted to be their default. They don't set any of them as a default. They present all 3 of them as possibilities. A lot of organized play people, especially, use standard array. If you play in the Adventures League, you have to use standard array or point buy. Point buy and standard array basically are the same basic points. It's just that standard array is one specific build of those points, where point buy lets you fiddle around with the numbers just a little bit. But that was one of the basic underlying assumptions in the challenge rating system, and it has been in the challenge rating system for 3rd edition and 5th edition. We'll talk about 4th edition in a minute. Now, another assumption, and you might think this isn't true, but it is that you were taking options out of the player handbook. I know that they've all kinds of new books came in, and they were opening it up to all kinds of new books. But when they balanced the challenge rating system initially, it was balanced against the default options, not all the expanded options that you can get from other books. The other books instead were written with the assumption that whoever wrote those books, because in 3rd edition, all these third parties could write the books, not just Wizards of the Coast. But the underlying assumption was they were supposed to be balancing the new options to what already existed. So the challenge rating system was balanced against the default options. Then the expanded options were balanced against the challenge rating system with or without success. So when you use a challenge rating system, you're going to assume that they're using choices out of the player handbook and not all the other options. Now, 3rd edition and 4th edition assumed a specific magic item progression by level. They assumed that a 5th level character has approximately this much magic items on them. Although there was the ability to expand or pull back from the magic items as a DM, you could make a higher magic world and whatever. The assumption for the challenge rating system and combat balance, if you're going to use it, was based around the fact that you did have this level of magic at this level. So that was 3rd and 4th edition. So that was built into the assumption. So if you had less magic items than your level expected, you weren't as good as your level indicated against challenges of an equal level. Just like if you had more characters in a party, you might be better off. If you had less characters in your party, you might be worse off versus challenge. This is the same thing. If you didn't have the appropriate magic items for your level, you were considered handicapped in the overall balance. In comes 5th edition, which is the one we're playing right now. And in 5th edition, they took magic items out of the equation. They wanted it to be playable if your DM never handed you a single magic item. They wanted all levels of magic to be acceptable, and they wanted to bring back the magic of magic items, because a magic item was supposed to make you, to use a sports metaphor, fight above your weight class. So if you're a 1st level character, but you get a +1 weapon, you're now fighting as like a 2nd or 3rd level character, 4th level character, or maybe, tiered up character, depending on what the individual weapon is and what all it does. But the fact is, a magic item was supposed to be a trump card. It's supposed to be an ace in the hole, to use card metaphors. It was supposed to make you break the balance in your favor. So magic items are not calculated into the challenge rating system. So when you're building challenges for your characters in 5th edition, and you have given them magic items, you need to bump the challenge up appropriately for the magic items you've given them. Now, if they're mostly cosmetic items or flavor items that don't do much in combat, don't have to worry so much. But and with the bounded accuracy of 5th edition, you don't have to worry as much, because now the maximum plus you can get off of an item is 3. It used to be 5. Fourth edition and earlier, it was always 5 that you could get up to your plus on your thing. And then in third edition um, and fourth edition, you could keep building your character's stats higher and higher and higher. They weren't capped out at 20 for a regular mortal without magic. But in 5th edition, they put bounded accuracy in. So the maximum you're going to get from a magic item is +3. So even if you don't factor it in completely, it's not going to throw the numbers off as much as it used to. I mean, you're still not going to give a first or second level character a +3 weapon, probably, because it's going to be increasing their chance of hitting by 15% based on the 20-sided die. Each number on the 20-sided die is 5%. So +3 is kind of like a 15% increase in probability. Now, considering the fact that they've already got whatever other pluses they have, their overall percentage of hitting is going up, and so it makes it even harder and harder for them to miss. But that was one of the underlying assumptions. Now, another thing that they brought in, and this was really more formalized in 4th and then 5th edition, not as much in 3rd edition, was the number of encounters you can do in a day. Because 3rd edition didn't have the underlying assumption of the long and short rest thing as much. But starting in 4th edition, a short rest would get you back what they called your encounter abilities or encounter powers, and a long rest would get you back what's called your daily powers. In previous editions, those were like your spell slots or your once a day or X number of times a day encounter powers that you might have had in the game. Example of an encounter power might be a channel divinity for a cleric. In older editions, you can do X number of times a day, but you generally didn't spam it every single encounter because you can only do it so many times, but you weren't limited to just one. You could usually do it like twice or 3 times or something. Druid's wild shape, things of that nature. In 4th edition, you had very specific things. You had at-will powers, which were your powers you could do all the time, similar to cantrips in 5th edition. And in fact, cantrips are kind of based on the at-will slot. Then you had your encounter powers, which required a short rest to get them back. And a short rest in 4th edition was 10 minutes. In 5th edition, it's an hour. And you can adjust that as part of it being a DM. But you get those powers back. Basically, that means you could use them once in an individual encounter, but you might have 3 or 4 or 5 different encounter powers. So you would cycle through them, but it meant that you didn't try to use them necessarily first off every encounter because you might need to wait and save it, especially if you don't end up getting that 10-minute break between encounters, like if you're running some kind of juggernaut, or if you're in a dangerous underground dungeon area and you can't find a safe place to even catch your breath for 10 minutes, you might not always get your encounter powers back. So they have encounter powers. And then they had daily powers, and daily powers were your spell slots. You had X slots a day. Then once you did a full 8-hour rest, once in a 24-hour period, you got it. So they based the encounter day on X number of encounters for that encounter day. And 3rd edition was really based on number of encounters before you level, not number of encounters per day. 3rd edition kind of said 13 and a half encounters, then you level. Was about the approximate. If you did 13 and a half encounters, everybody in the party would level. If in 4th edition you did 10 encounters of equal level to level, because that's how they built the experience system, but they expected you to do 6 to 8 medium or equal to hard encounters in a day between rests, 6 to 8. So you did not go into your first encounter of the day and blow your daily. At first level, you had one daily. You didn't necessarily blow it right away. It went back to the old edition wizard. He didn't go shoot his one spell off in the first encounter. He waited to see where it would be the most useful. And so the challenge rating system is based on that too. The challenge rating system is based on the fact that each encounter throughout the day is meant to take up a certain percentage of your resources based on the type of the encounter, and the challenge rating kind of reflects that type of encounter. But that means that if you come across a challenge later in the day when you've used up a bunch more resources, the challenge is going to be harder than the number seems because the resources that you'd expect to have to take it on are gone. This includes your ability to heal. You only have so many healing spells in a given day. In 4th edition, you had only so many healing surges that you could apply to heal in a given day. We're not going to go into 4th edition surges right now, but these were the things that were in the underlying assumption of the challenge rating system. Is about 6 to 8 medium to hard encounters in a given day between rests. You did not go rest, encounter, rest, encounter, rest, which is what a lot of people did to break the system. That's why a lot of people, especially in 4th edition, said that you couldn't die in 4th edition and players were so much more powerful than they were supposed to be, is they were going into one encounter in the day, blowing their entire wad. Lendon had it with both barrels. Every daily comes out first. Every encounter comes out next. By the time they're done, the enemies are smoking ruins. You've come out basically unscathed, but everybody takes a long rest immediately to get everything reset. But forgetting that in the rules, you're only supposed to be able to take one long rest in a 24-hour period. And DMs were not necessarily putting in any impetus of time or urgency to make them not want to rest every encounter. An encounter round only takes 6 seconds, people, and it has been that way pretty much for most of D&D. So that means that your average encounter, that your average medium encounter will last no more than 5 rounds. So that's 30 seconds. You've not even spent a minute out of your day. If you have 8 hours of rest bracketing your day, you still have 16 hours in the middle of the day to do things. And sure, in 5th edition, you have 1 hour long rests that break some of that up. And you'll have interaction encounters that take longer than combat encounters, exploration encounters that take longer than combat encounters. But even then, you're still, when you do get your occasional encounter in, it's going to take, even a boss encounter. If a boss encounter takes 5 whole minutes, that's a slugfest. That's taken forever. Uh, that's 50 rounds of combat to go to 5 minutes. That's why spells that last a minute pretty much are almost guaranteed to last the whole combat. And a lot of times why they put in the concentration mechanic for 5th edition is because otherwise you pretty much could just say that spell's going to last the whole combat. Because a minute-long spell is going to, and a 10-minute long spell can last through several combats. If you end up running some kind of a juggernaut and you only get a minute or 2 rest between combat encounters, or because you've cast that 10-minute spell, you try to rush from one encounter to the other before the spell wears off and not waste the slot, then those are causing urgency, which is one of the things the DM needs to do. So in the balancing of the challenge rating system, they took into account 6 to 8 encounters in a day. And so if you don't do the 6 to 8 encounters in a day of a medium to hard difficulty level, then you're not meeting the challenge rating assumption. And by medium, I mean a balance to the party. And hard is, for numerical purposes, like if a medium is your party level to your party level plus 1, hard is your party level plus 2 to 3. And then deadly or dangerous or boss level is 4 to 5. And then anything beyond 5 levels above your party is technically supposed to be run for it. You cannot do this without extreme luck kind of thing. And how it breaks down in one of the older DMGs was, in a given day, about 15% of your encounters are going to be easy. that's lower than the challenge rating of your party. That's when you come across the 1 or 2 sentinels, like a couple of kobolds just guarding, and you got to take out that sentinel. Really easy. Uses less than 20%, usually less than 10% of your resources. Could possibly use none of your um, limited resources. You could take on that encounter with nothing but cantrips and constant renewal stuff. And that's your easy encounter. About 15% of them in a day are that. Then if 50% are on that even level, and that's your level to your level plus 1, so slightly more difficult than your level. And those are meant to use up about 20% to no more than 50%. If you're really not great at husbanding resources, you might use as much as 50% of your resources in that even level encounter. But really, it's supposed to use about 20%, about a fifth of your daily expendable resources. So if you have 5 spell slots per day, you might use one of those slots in that encounter. That kind of thing. Then the next 30% is kind of tricky because that's your hard encounters. These are the ones that are 2 to 3 challenge ratings above the party or require something special to overcome. So about half of them, so 15% of your encounters a day, are just plus 2 to 3 challenge ratings. Then the other 15% of your day, the other half of the hard are the tricky ones where it might be impossible to beat the encounter until you figure out that like they can only be hit by silver weapons, or only this one sword only the weapons around the room can hurt it, not necessarily the ones you brought with you, or only magic can hurt this creature, or it's immune to fire and acid, or there's little tricks involved with the creature, and until you figure out the trick of the encounter, not I say creature, but I mean uh, the encounter itself could be nigh on impossible. But once you figure out the trick, it could come all the way down to easy, depending. Um, Encounters like this include things like swarms, where the party may not realize, like in 4th edition, a swarm took half damage from all uh, bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing attacks. Period. Magical or not, took half damage. But they took double damage from any area of effect attacks. So if you did area effect attacks on them, even something as small of an area as a cloud of dagger, it did double damage. So you could real quickly take out a swarm with a low level caster, and the casters were the ones you wanted to take on the swarms, not the melee fighters. Uh, and that was a trick, and that would have put it into the more dangerous range if they were using challenge ratings uh, of a more evil thing, but you would bump it to dangerous because of that trick needed. Or like fighting lycanthropes, where you have to use silver or magic to hurt the lycanthrope. That's fine. You have to figure that out. Once you figure it out, it becomes easier. And then finally, we have 5% of the day left if you're keeping up your math, because you had 50 for the even, 15 for easy, and 30 for those difficults. 30 plus 15 is 45 plus 50 is 95%. You got 5% left. And that 5% left was your deadly encounters, or to use video game parlance, your boss or mini boss encounters. These are the ones that are +4 to +5 challenge ratings above the party. You generally do not use anything more than 5 levels above the party, only because it becomes at that level, especially in third edition and 4th edition. From that level on, it becomes almost impossible for the party to hit without a crit, without a nat 20. And it's also next to impossible for the monster to miss without a nat 1. So you usually didn't send them against anything over 5 levels above, unless the sole intention was them to either back off, grind, get better, and come back, or to talk their way around that encounter or sneak their way around that encounter. They're not intended to fight that encounter, because you overcome an encounter doesn't mean that you engage in the encounter. It could mean that you bypass the encounter cleverly, uh, or diplomatically. That's which is kind of cleverly but different. So that's the thing, is how they broke it down. So that's how we did it. So of course, back to the challenge rating system, it is based on 6 to 8 medium to hard encounters. If you do the boss type encounter, you can have less encounters in the day. If you do a bunch of easy encounters, you can have more encounters a day. And remember, encounters in this aspect is about using up resources, which means not all of them have to be combat encounters. An encounter of an exploration type that requires you to use a spell slot used up a resource. So it's still an encounter, and it still counts towards that list of encounters. So if you have to use 2 or 3 resources, 2 or 3 like spell slots or limited daily special abilities in a non-combat format, and that means that you've used up 20 or 50 or 60 or 80% of your resources, you're going to look at that encounter. First off, you're going to look at what the median level would take to beat that encounter. So did they overdo it with the spells and stuff? Or did they underdo it with the spells? Or what was the median level it took to really overcome the challenge? And that's kind of more what the challenge rating of that encounter is going to look like. Then they sometimes will blow a bunch of their extras. That makes them ripe for that next encounter you come in the day, that combat encounter that normally would have been just an even encounter, but because you're out of daily abilities and you're out of single use abilities and you're out of almost all of your healing, that regular balanced encounter might have bumped all the way up to deadly. It's not a boss, but it seems like one because you're so exhausted and used all your resources for the day. This is where things like warlocks have a little bit of advantage because they get their main resource type, which is spell slots. They don't have a lot of them, but they get them back on a short rest reset. So that helps them out a little bit if you can squeeze in that short rest, because there's no guarantee, just like a long rest, that you'll ever get the short rest in. And then there's always those DMs that use the optional rules where a short rest is 8 hours in a given 24-hour day, thus you're limited to one. And the long rest is actually a week. That means you have to use a week of downtime or, very slow, relaxing stuff like maybe shopping. That's about it in order to get those back. And you also got to remember that the way a lot of DMs run it is if you've got any kind of exhaustion on your character, you either get the exhaustion back or the hit points back, generally not both. You have to eliminate all the exhaustion levels on yourself before you can start healing again. Now, some DMs may or may not allow you to refresh your abilities because of that too. That's up to the individual DM. Everybody's DM's table is their table. Still looks like we only have one person, but I'm going in depth with this. It's fine. I actually love this subject, and so I have no problem with talking on it. And so those are your underlying uh, things that are in the challenge rating system. And in 5th edition, it follows pretty much all of that. 4th edition, I did say we'd come back to that about something in their challenge rating system. One thing 4th edition did, which I wish they had kept moving forward with, is they got rid of one of the underlying assumptions. They didn't assume a 3 to 5 man party. Instead, 5th edition broke each monster down to a per character challenge. So it may not have balanced as well as far as action economy went, but it did balance pretty good when it came to building encounter against a party, because it actually did 2 things which adjusted it. First off, because it was building the challenges based on individuals in your party, it was able to do something else, which was to assign roles to the monsters. So instead of having a goblin entry as just a generic entry into the monster manual, you turned to the goblin part of the monster manual and you saw 5 or 6 goblins there. And they were different varieties of goblins based on different monster roles. And the monster roles were analogous to a lot of the player roles. Um, so, for instance, if you have a DPS person or a striker in your party, one of the ways you counter the striker in your party is another type of striker in the enemy party. And then they had a couple of options though, because there was a few more roles for monsters. Because there was one that was called an artillery, and they were just basically your ranged strikers. They didn't do a lot close up, but they could do a lot at ranged. So an artillery piece might be put in to counter a striker and also to counter a tank. Because if you can keep the tank backed up far enough, they're not going to prevent your other party, the other monsters from moving in. So there was an artillery piece. Then there was the skirmisher, which was the other DPS kind of variant for monsters. And the skirmisher was the one that liked to come in and work together as teams, got pack tactics in there, and gave each other advantage so that you could do things like the monster equivalent of sneak attacks and bonus damage and getting advantage and stuff of that nature was your skirmisher. Then the third one, because there was 3 for the DPS guy, because the DPS guy was the most versatile, and some will say the most important member of any party is your striker, your DPS guy, your one that does the damage and has the mobility on the field. Well, monsters, they broke it down. So instead of a single one that had all of the things that a striker had, they had the mobility, they had the ability to do the damage, the ability to hide and to grant um, extra damage to other players, and all that. Those are all aspects of the striker. But instead, you had the 3 versions of the monster one: the artillery we talked about, and the skirmisher we talked about, and then the last one was called the skulker, and that was your hide and shadows guy. He's the one that loves to assassinate, attack from behind, assassinate. He gets one good attack in, then he has to waste turns trying to hide again, so he can do it again later. But that was a role for the monsters. Then the monsters had the tanky roles, and they had 2 tanky roles. They had the brute, which was your generic, credible Hulk brute, big, bound with muscle, can take a lot of damage because they have a lot of hit points. Might even have great armor or some kind of evasion ability like a barbarian. So they also take less damage from those abilities. And they have a big bucket of hit points. So if they do take damage, it's not going to hurt them as much. They might also have certain physical saving throws that are better so they can draw that kind of fire. That was your brute. Then the other one that they had to represent the tanky characters, or the defenders, as I use the 4th edition term, was called the soldier. The soldier was your military trained tank guy. His whole thing was, yes, defending the more squishy members of the party, but he did it with tactics as well as brute strength, or instead of brute strength. Your soldiers often had similar abilities to some of your skirmishers in like pack tactics. They were able to grant advantage to an opponent that worked in tandem with them. So you get 2 soldiers working together are better than the equivalent of just 2 soldiers. They actually are more worth 2.5 or even 3 soldiers because of the coordination. And that's what the soldier won for. That was the intelligent monster brute. And they were good ones for the ranger to use as well. And they were, like I said, analogous to the striker or the DPS guy. Now, moving on to controller. Well, controller is controller, and it was a subcategory for monsters. You could tack it on to any other role monster. So a monster kind of dual rolled with controller. Because of the fact that your monsters, you don't see them as often. Often you see them in less quantities as the players overall. You only see them for an individual encounter, things of that nature. So your monsters were looked at a little bit differently than the player characters. So they took the controller one, and instead of making it a role unto itself, they made it an add-on. So you could be a brute controller or what have you. And you could go around doing that. You could kind of sort of do the same thing with the leader ability. You could be a brute leader and things because those two were magically based. And with monsters, like I said, you don't have them hanging around as long as you have the players hanging around, the player characters. So sometimes you had to handle them a little bit differently and a little bit more finely tuned, targeted. And that's why you had the ability to make leader as just a subclass of whatever else they were, um, or controller be just a subclass of whatever else they were, and that's how it went. And your controller is still quintessentially your wizard. In fourth edition, they created a lot of other controller types for the different power sources. There was your invoker for the spiritual. There was a berserk creature guy for the barbarian, uh, so on. Rangers could join some, but not others. Um, and these were your monster rolls for that. And then you had your monster rolls for your leaders. Now, like I said, leader was something they could tack on to other people. So you had a leader controller, quite often a good combination. You might have a leader brute. It would be a big brute, but he does have the ability to maybe inspire all the people with him. He gives them a big morale boost, makes them all attack better, or gives them a spot heal because they've been inspired. So those are things. But that was the thing in fourth edition that they changed about the challenge rating system, and they did not move it forward into fifth, and I really think they should have. Um, the other thing they had in combat, they had three special roles in combat in fourth edition that some people are bringing into their fifth edition game with a lot of success. The first role was called a minion. A minion was 1 hit point, but they didn't take any kind of auto damagey things uh, to compensate for only having that 1 hit point. They usually had massive armor because they could be more than 5 challenge ratings above the party because the minion part of it dumbed them down a little bit. So they became next to impossible to hit sometimes, but you get 1 hit in, they're gone. They crumple. They're very much glass cannon characters. So it was easier to do a horde kind of adventure thing without overwhelming your party with bunches of monsters that all had, even 4 or 5 hit points. Could be a lot trickier to deal with than this guy that's going to die as long as you get a hit through on him. That was the minion. Then they had the elite monster. And the elite monster was the equivalent of 2 characters of the same level instead of just 1. This was a kind of a little bit of a nod to the other system where they had the assumed 3 to 5 party. This gave the ability for the DM to send only 1 or 2 of a monster against a bigger party, but still have them be viable. These monsters typically had a couple of extra kind of attacky actions mid-turn that they could do, or some aura or danger around their body that gave disadvantage to people when they moved around. And so that was your elite monster. Your elite monster had twice the hit points of a single monster the same level and everything, and he was considered twice the challenge rating as far as that went. So if you wanted to take your second level party against a single monster type of thing, or only a couple of monsters, but still make it balanced, you send in a couple of elites instead of necessarily just looking at the higher level monsters and bringing one of those in. So it gave you a little bit more versatility as far as that goes. Now, finally, the last role was called the solo monster. And the solo monster is, as you might expect, his job is to go in by himself and wipe the party clean. He was based on a 3 to 5 man party. he was worth 5 times the experience of his initial challenge rating. He could take things on by himself, or he could be accented with a few minions, but his own ability to summon either extra damage or extra minions is stifled a little bit in the combat. But that was your other thing. And that would be kind of the equivalent in 5th edition or 4th edition, without going into the sexual part of it. It would be kind of the equivalent of what am I trying to think? I kind of lost my train of thought here. Um, it was kind of the bringing the big brood out. Uh, he's all bark, but he's not as much bite as you think. He's the bully that once you can get through his defenses, you know. But these are the this is I'm sorry I'm backtracking. I'm talking about the solo monster. Your solo monster was the equivalent of your 3rd edition and your 5th edition regular monsters that were the equivalent of taking on a party of 3 to 5 characters. They were meant to take on a party of 3 to 5 characters by themselves. And they might have some small minions still, but they were still the ones expected to do the majority of the damage. And the minions are really just meant to slow everybody down. So you often paired a solo or elite monster with minion monsters instead of leveled monsters just because of that distinction. And then there you would go. So, like, for instance, something like a Hydra is a solo monster. It's got several heads, several attacks in a round, which changes up the action economy. But it's really like on their turn, you were just doing group experience, group initiative for the monster, and each tentacle is taking a turn as if it's a separate entity. But they're only worth 1 pull of experience, but they're usually worth about 5 times the experience of the generic creature of their same level. So again, that's how each of those 3 editions have been handling the challenge rating system. And that's why it seems to break down for so many people, is because they don't fit into that exact mold. Now, 5th edition has embraced a lot from older editions and discarded some. And is always kind of a question of what needed to be discarded and what needs to be changed. And if you look at the homebrews house rules at a lot of tables, that's where you're going to find a lot of feedback about what should and shouldn't have been brought forward into 5th edition. And then if they ever do change it up to bring out a 6th edition, which you're hopefully planning on not doing because the way 5th edition is structured, but if they ever come up with a 6th edition, that's when they're going to look through the various results of this 5th edition and the 3rd edition and the D&D Next playtest, and they're going to possibly run another playtest. That's when they're going to calculate things, and every edition, in my opinion, has improved off the last. So they've always learned something from before, and then they've often will come back and repeat a mistake that we thought they'd gotten over with. You know, like the character that smoked as a child gets over smoking as an adult, then has a stressful life crisis, and the first thing they reach for is a cigarette, and now they're suddenly addicted again. You know, I'm so tired, I don't even know where I got that particular analogy, where I was coming from there. But, oh yeah, we're talking about the different editions of D&D. So every edition has got some improvements. I'm still waiting for them to really dig into and improve the magic system in D&D again and make it feel even more magical. And it's a good start with 5th edition, but I want to see more cursed items. I want to see items harder to identify than just bonding with them or attuning them and suddenly you know everything they can do. I want to see more involved identify rituals, you know, multi-step identification processes that could make it more flowing. So really, those are the things that I'm looking forward to in 6th edition. Maybe in 6th edition they'll go back to 4th edition's thing of basing the challenge rating system on the single monster versus the single character thing. Even though it is a group-based game mechanic. D&D is meant to be for a group. It's not for a bunch of lone wolves. You can run D&D solo, and you can split the party, and you can do this. But the game is not exactly built for that. It is built for the party endeavor. And so I would like to see, just because it makes the math work better, I would like to see them throw back to the fourth edition way of handling uh, the challenge rating system. I love what fifth edition has done with some other systems. For those who don't know, I'm one of those of the rare of the older D&D players that actually liked fourth edition. It was in fact my favorite. Don't hit me with the pitchforks and the torches. Let me tell you why. Fourth edition answered a lot of the complaints we'd had throughout the years of the other editions. And I've been playing for 42 years, so I've heard a lot of the complaints. And I saw the direct relationships. Fourth edition was a more cinematic game, which is okay because that's kind of some of the scenes we've been wanting to play as adventurers. I mean, a lot of people try to treat D&D as a life simulator in the medieval times. It was never meant to be that. D&D is an abstraction game, not a simulator. And as such, it uses a lot of abstraction and flavor to tell their story. So things don't have to be perfect or accurate or everything that cognitive dissonance that you'll hear people complain about, especially with fourth edition, is not necessarily a problem in fourth edition because it was never meant to be a true simulator. Hit points are not pints of blood. If anything, healing surges were closer to true hit points in fourth edition than hit points were, because hit points measure not just um, pints of blood, but fatigue and being off balance and low morale and all these kind of things are built all the way up and into the hit point system. And that's why every character in fourth edition, once per encounter, could do what was called a second wind, not to be confused with the second wind from fifth edition. And this one would allow them to spend one of their healing surges in order to heal themselves. And really, they're not healing, they're not causing their own wounds to close, less bleeding or anything. Really, that second wind is causing them to rally and persevere and shrug off the morale hits and the fatigue and to rebalance themselves to go back into battle. But you didn't want to make that an unlimited thing, so they still had to, uh, make it as not a make not as much a big deal about it. So people often misinterpreted it. Um, I don't want to go into edition wars because I find value in every edition of D&D. And people can edition war for hours, and that's nothing but negativity. Uh, is any system better than any other? Very much an opinionated thing that I can't answer because my definition and yours could be quite different. But what I can say is there's a D&D out there for everybody currently, and D&D is going in the right direction with what it's doing with 5th edition. And if they do ever do a 6th edition, which they're hoping not to do because of their new business model, and I'm wishing them all the luck, but if they do a 6th edition, one, it might just be a supplement that adds to 5th edition in such a way to where all your 5th edition stuff is still relevant. It's just the 6th edition is like a plug-in, like a DLC content for one of your favorite games. And once you plug the other stuff in, it'll still work just fine. That's what I'm hoping for. Um, Other things that they need to do with D&D, D&D itself needs their own platform to play online. And they're working towards that. D&D Beyond is getting more and more platformy. It's starting to have its own dice rolling thing. You can already manage the characters there. You can manage campaigns there. They haven't got a mapping app yet. They haven't got their own voice or video server integrated into the system, but who knows? Those might be down the pipe. But until then, they are using some other third party ones as excellent surrogates, like Roll20. Roll20.net is a great place to go if you need a virtual tabletop. I personally recommend it. Another option that I don't use myself is Fantasy Grounds, but I do believe Fantasy Grounds, to use it with any effect at all, you do, at least one person needs to have a paid Fantasy Grounds account. I happen to have a paid Roll20 account, but it's not required to do what I wanted to do. It just facilitates some extra bells and whistles that I actually like and made it worth it to me. These are all these kind of tools are out there to help you with your D&D game, and they're there to help you with other games too. Because like games like Roll20, tools like Roll20 work for other games. If you want to play Dungeon Crawl Classics, you can find Dungeon Crawl Classics support in Roll20. If you want to play Serenity, the role-playing game, then you will find that it facilitates that. If you want to play the board game Settlers of Catan, you can get that on Roll20. Yeah, you know, yeah, Settlers of Catan, as my girlfriend just pointed out, has its own website, but that has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. We're talking about the fact that Roll20 facilitates all kinds of different gaming platforms in one platform. And they have a fairly easy macro language to learn to set up your own macros and stuff to make things facilitate even further. A lot of things, if you set your game to a specific game, some of it is pre-done for you. Like you can you can choose to incorporate the Roll20 5th edition D&D character sheet, and then a lot of that work is already done for you. So if you plug in the numbers on the character sheet, it pre-writes the macros to do the various things you need to do. So Roll20 is an excellent resource. Like I said, I'm not as familiar with Fantasy Grounds, but I do know you're required, at least, like I said, one person to have a paid account to do some of the same stuff in Fantasy Grounds. Now, a lot of people will complain like Roll20's chat system is not as reliable. So what they'll do is they'll play in Roll20, but they'll use like Discord for chatting. That's fine too. Or they'll use Zoom to chat or what have you. I've been talking almost nonstop. We still have only had one viewer in the channel. That's fine. We never actually got a topic suggested, so I've just been going over some of the underlying things involved in the challenge rating system. And I went into them a little bit more in depth than I did during the panel, because during the panel I had other questions involved, and instead I was answering those. And even my previous recording, I didn't go into as much history in depth. I went in another way because the show was about that. We're here, we're just kind of handling things until we get some questions. So I can go in more depth and do a little bit more rambling and not feel like I'm wasting everybody's time towards a specific goal, because we don't have a specific goal right now. But anyway, so building the challenge, building the encounters and the challenge rating system was what I did as one of my panels at Virtual Vision Con. Another example of some of the things I've done for D&D players, every year at GAME, the Gaming Arts Media Entertainment Expo, which will not have a physical manifestation this year, but we are looking into doing something online, and keep your eyes and ears peeled to find out what that is. We're still discussing, but I always do. I mean, I have an RPG college table where I do a lot of these things, but one of the things I do in the panel room there is called a DM's roundtable, where I mediate a roundtable where old and new DMs, old and new players are all welcome to come in, and everybody gets input into the discussion. And so different DMs are going to tell you their experiences in different things, and I usually try to bring up a topic to start discussing, and then we go from there. My last roundtable last year at GAME actually featured Keith Baker, the designer of the Eberron campaign set and one of the co-owners of Together Studios. Keith Baker was one of our two special guests. Well, three because Keith and his wife were there as special guests, and then Satine Phoenix was a special guest that year. Unfortunately, I couldn't get Satine for the roundtable because she had a game to run during that time slot. But Keith Baker, I had gotten with him to make sure his schedule was clear, and he came in for the D&D roundtable, so it was a really valuable sharing of information. So I do DM roundtable panels. Last year at VisionCon, when they did have a physical VisionCon, I did a physical panel on writing character backstories. A little bit different from backgrounds. This is backstories, and it basically gave people guidelines on how to do that. So these are some of the things that you can learn through the RPG College. As I've said on more than one occasion, I've been doing this for 42 years. One of these days, I might even get it right. Not holding my breath, but that 42 years of knowledge, good or bad, I'm willing to share with anybody who wants it. And if you're a new DM out there, or if you're a struggling DM out there, or you're a new or struggling player out there and you've got some questions that you need to be answered, I can give you those answers from the viewpoint of somebody who has seen the game evolve from the late 70s when I started to now. We're in the year 2020, and 42 years after I started playing D&D, I'm still playing D&D, and I'm still playing the newest edition. You know, I'm still seeing the growth in the game, and I'm still seeing it improve. And so I'm looking forward to see what improvements and growth the game is going to come up in the future. And I want to share my knowledge with the folks out there. And that's one of the things I do. It's part of the reason I do the RPG College table at Game. It's part of the reason I do panels or run games at VisionCon. It's part of the reason that I'm on the board of directors for Game, the Gaming Arts Media Entertainment Expo. I do their cross promotions, which means I go to other conventions to represent our convention so that, you know, we can kind of cross promote each other and build our community. I also go into libraries and schools and things um, to teach different D&D things as panels. Uh, leave it up to you. It's up to you. I mean, he might get it, he might not, but it's up to you. I mean, when it comes down to it, it's your decision. Well, they can't be done this weekend, or if you want to give it a try, you can. I mean, I'll support you on it. I mean, they're opening stuff up whether we want them to or not. I mean, at a certain point, we're going to have to let them do stuff.
And it's been how long?
April, March, April, yeah. Actually, February even some of this started. So yeah, I'm sorry about that, guys. I mean, well, I still only show my one Phantom viewer, so I don't know if I interrupted anybody, but our 15-year-old is in Boy Scouts. We're still kind of in lockdown, quarantine for COVID. We're being a little bit more cautious than some because we don't believe that it's necessarily the right time to open everything back up. But the 15-year-old has a chance to go camping next weekend with his scouts, and girlfriend wanted my opinion on whether we should let him go because we've not let him do some of the other stuff, even though they are opening other stuff back up. But we're going to go ahead and let him do it and see what happens. I hate to add the added risk, especially since I'm immunocompromised and my girlfriend gets sick at the drop of a hat. But at this point, more and more people are just opening things up and doing it anyway. So it's becoming harder and harder to, for one, justify to the child why he can't do what all the other kids are doing. He is 15 years old. He wants to get out. He wants to do stuff. He wants to interact. He is a scout, and we see value in scouting. You know, it's just like I would love to go back to face D&D, and they're opening up the game room at Metagames. Recent announcement for those who didn't know. Metagames will be opening on the 19th their gaming area, initially with 8 tables for no more than 5 people playing per table. The cost, they're going to add a cost to it for now to help subsidize the additional cleaning and staffing that it needs to take care of the area. So it's $2 per hour per table, not per person, per table. So it's really reasonable. And it's only going to be a short term. They're not going to keep this price in. They've already assured us this is just a short term thing until they're able to open the back room up fully. And so on the 19th is when that starts. And then about a week later, they're going to expand their hours, open hours, out a little bit more so you can have more time to facilitate use of said tables. And then they may even open up more tables at that point because Springfield is now in their coming into their next phase of the reopening plan. And a lot of businesses are going to be allowed to be at up to 50% capacity. And at that point, your social distancing is going to take a hit. So some of these places, Nameless City already has their game room open, I guess, from what I hear. So you can go to Nameless City right now and use their game room, but they've got adjusted hours. So make sure to check the adjusted hours, which is on one of their doors, and their regular hours on the other doors. So make sure you look at the right one. But you can go and do some gaming at Nameless. They've got a much smaller gaming area, so less people can go in there to do that. So you be cautious. But if you are jonesing for some live interaction with people, and I understand most of us, I'm a social individual. I want to be out with people. I want to be out doing karaoke, and I want to be out playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to go to the movies. I mean, it's nice to see a movie streamed here to the house, but I would love to see something on the big screen, and I don't do that a whole lot. Even when we weren't in quarantine, I didn't do it a whole lot, but I do like the option of going in to do that. We do like to go out and eat at a nice restaurant about once a week. Uh, and we've been able to do that to a limited extent if the restaurant is practicing some good social distancing practices. We will attempt it. And so we're looking at letting the child go camping next weekend. We'll see what happens. Now, my fear and my girlfriend's fear and several people, like-minded people's fear is that the COVID second wave is really going to hit hard, and it's going to hit when we have our backs turned. It's going to hit when we think everything is mostly back to normal. And because, okay, a little bit of history for people. This has nothing to do with D&D, but it's still a little bit of history. Don't have a lot of people here, so I can really talk about whatever I want right now. And I'm not talking to my phone, who wants to tell me other things, because the phone likes to do that. But a little bit of history for people is that back in 1918, we had the Spanish flu. And the Spanish flu worldwide killed less than 5 million people the first go around. And then when they thought they had everything under control and they opened everything back up, it was great until the second wave hit of the Spanish flu. Now, the second wave, you might expect to hit and kill, another 4 or 5 million people, right? Because the first one did that, and we weren't prepared for the first one, and we should be partially prepared for the second one, right? So the second wave hits, and we might expect another 4 or 5 million. No, closer to 50 million people died in the second wave. So 10 times as many as the first wave died in the Spanish flu's second wave. And what we don't want to see is COVID-19 doing that same comeback encore performance. I mean, this is one encore we're not calling for. And I think we're rushing to open things up. We open things up with the proviso that if more spikes happened, we would close back down. Well, guess what? We have recorded more spikes. It is legitimate on there, but they're still reticent to close things up again because a lot of people don't want it closed. I understand the hit it is happening to the economy. I understand that businesses are losing their shirts. I understand that people are having a difficulty, especially with the fact that the stimulus payment that they did, one was a single one was not enough to cover all the backlash of COVID. But two, it is not still reached everybody that it needs to reach, while some areas has made it reach people that it never should have reached. Because there's deceased people have gotten their stimulus payment because the system didn't realize that they were deceased. People that are in prison have received their stimulus payment, even though they don't actually qualify for a payment. Some people have received more than one payment by accident because of the fact that the system had some errors in it. So the stimulus payment system has not come out as smoothly as they hoped, and it's still insufficient to cover all the trials and tribulations of people. And it's gone out to people. I mean, it's nice that they included pretty much everybody in the stimulus payment, including people like on Social Security and disability who were still getting their normal checks, like myself. But at the same time, we technically didn't need it. Yes, we need it because we've been chronically underpaid for a while, but that has nothing to do with the stimulus and has a whole lot to do with the fact that we also didn't pay as much into Social Security as Social Security needs to pay out the amount now. Our coffers are empty, but that's completely another subject. I'm not going to go into that. But the stimulus pack was insufficient. And so people are chomping at the bit to get back to work. And people are chomping at the bit to go back to some more life as normal. People want their kids back in schools next semester. People want their kids back in Boy Scouts. People want their kids back doing their sporting activities. People want to go back to the gym. They want to go back to the spa. They want to go get their nails and their hair done. They want to go out to eat and not be stuck eating at home all the time. Not everybody's the best cook. One thing my household is lucky is my girlfriend is a great cook, and I used to be a chef, and the boy can cook. So we're lucky compared to some people in that we can have some great food, and it actually, in some ways, makes it cheaper on us. But it's still too early to be reopening things, I think. And so we're trying not to be hypocrites to our beliefs. And so we're not going out, even though the more and more stuff is becoming available, we're not taking advantage of all of it because we still believe it's too soon. At the same time, we have to look at our child, and we don't want him to feel left out, and we don't want him to feel like we're being unfair to him. And so we have to balance these things and decide, where do we draw the line? If everybody else is allowed to go back out, should we let him go back out? We can't overprotect him as much as we want to, because I mean he's 15. He's into the teenage years now. He's going to start rebelling anyway. If we try to stop him from doing things, he's just going to do them behind our backs. So it'd be better if we actually allow him to do a few things that we at least approve of. And the Boy Scouts, and what? And for if it weren't for all this, he would be going to these things because we definitely approve of the Boy Scouts. We love the lessons that it teaches him. So we want to make it available for him to do that. We want to encourage him. We want him to be an Eagle Scout. I was an Eagle Scout. I want him to be an Eagle Scout. His mom wants him to be an Eagle Scout. You know, these are the things that we want to encourage in his life. And to do that, we have to actually have um, the availability for him to go out and participate. And there's only some, I mean, he's lost a lot of time this year because of the quarantine. Now, granted, a lot of people have lost the time, but now a lot of people are going back. And if he doesn't go back, he's still missing time while they're not. And that puts him behind the curve. Now, luckily for him, we have been pretty consistent about making him available to go to almost every Boy Scouting event that has come up. We don't deny him Boy Scouting events where, the average Boy Scout maybe does about 10% of the activities. We get him to as many of the activities as possible. So he's done like 90% of the activities in the local area. So he could technically afford to get held behind a little bit, but we don't want him to do that. I mean, he's already got a friend younger than him that's made Eagle Scout. So he sees that as a challenge. And we don't want to discourage him from making his way in there. And we don't want to discourage him from being that 15-year-old. He is one of the nicest kids you're going to meet. He is conscientious and courteous, even outside of just being a Boy Scout. He always offers to help people. He is always polite to his adults. I mean, he still doesn't understand some concepts of rudeness, and he does need to be corrected like any child does. And he still has, the attention deficit that every child is born with. He still has some of those factors, but going out and doing things like the Boy Scouts are one of the ways that he's going to handle those. The Boy Scouts encourage him to become better and better at it, not worse and worse. And if it came to be a choice between that and something else, we'd rather he went to the Boy Scouts. So we're going to allow him to go. Not that I needed to justify our decisions to you or even my time taking a minute to make that, but hey, nobody's really in the channel. I've got my one shadow viewer. They haven't said anything, so I don't know if they're a real viewer or not. I mean, this will go, it'll be recorded, it'll be sent to YouTube, but you could always just end the recording once you get to this diatribe. That's fine. I'm not having people make any comments or suggestions today. It's been a really slow show. I've only got like 18 minutes left before I stop, and then in 30 minutes after that, I will be simulcasting Left Claw Studios as they play, and it looks like they're playing Last of Us again on the PlayStation 4. So those are the kind of things that we might find on this channel. A lot of ways, even though I have the structured shows on my channel right now on my schedule, if you've seen my logo for RBG College, it does say videos in the raw. That means it is uncut, unedited. You get what I do with all my side tangents, everything. I'm not going in and I'm not editing things. These are just raw footage. I don't do that. I mean, the most you're going to see is, you see how my display board, I've got things showing up now because I'm using a broadcast software that lets me fiddle around with things so I can move my board, make it look all nice as I'm swapping through different presets that I've got set up on this board right now. I am using XSplit Broadcaster, and it was recommended by Felicia Day on her channel when I was watching the Guild Live D&D, and I picked it up, and I've just got the free version. But even with just the free version, it's done a lot for me for when I am broadcasting from my laptop. Now, when I broadcast from my PlayStation 4, I don't have this overlay because I do not have an external box that lets me play my PlayStation through my computer. So you don't get these overlays. But you'll find, because I've got this under the D&D category, that it has activated an extension that I've got optionally. So if you do hover over the screen with your mouse, a D&D Beyond overlay will come up if you wanted to check some stuff out on D&D Beyond. This is especially good if I'm actually playing a live game of D&D, because I'm working to try to make sure of how to do that, broadcast all the voices without my own voice becoming an infinite loop, which is the one problem I'm having right now. Because I do want to broadcast one of my games. I have a game Mondays from 5 to 9 p.m. currently that I do play on Roll20 for the most part. We play in Discord and Roll20, and I would love to be able to broadcast some of that gameplay. We've got a really interesting group, a lot of great gamers. My girlfriend's one of the players, and I would love to do that. And so that's some that we're looking forward to being able to do once I figure out all of the ways to do it with my current system. I don't have a special setup like a lot of streamcasters do. No special mics, breakaway boxes, anything like that. I don't have any push to talk set up. I'm still working on getting this set up. I need to eventually get a special room for it once we move out of this tiny trailer. Right now I'm sitting at my kitchen table. If you really look over my shoulder, you see the white of my refrigerator behind me, and you start to see the hallway going back to my bedroom, and you see the wood paneling of a cupboard above my refrigerator, and that's about it, because I don't have a special place to broadcast. If it was in our home, I talked about being the foodie nerd. If I was in a good home where we had room and everything, I would probably broadcast some cooking shows where I actually taught people how to cook things as well as D&D, because it is one of my nerdy hobbies, one of the things that I do, and I do want to share with other people. I'm a huge food nerd, and those are the things that you're going to get from me. To kind of call this last little bit a public service message of what to expect in the future from the Gamer Seuss channel on Twitch. Everything that I do on Twitch pretty much gets moved over to YouTube. I mean, if I have a kind of a dead show, nobody shows up and we don't do a lot, I may or may not bring that over to YouTube. I might just delete that one, not worry about it. If I do testers and things, I tend to delete those off. I don't send them to YouTube, like when I'm trying to test to try to get things to work. Um, but otherwise, I send most of my stuff over to YouTube so you can watch it later. So this show will be on YouTube within the next 7 to 10 days. I will export it over, and you will have the ability to rewatch this, even though nobody might have been necessarily live listening to this broadcast. And that's fine. There's a whole ton of stuff on Twitch that you can find to listen to. So I can understand that you're not always going to come in, especially if I don't have a specific topic and you don't have a specific question. But the hard part is still trying to find the people that have the questions and have the time available while I'm live streaming and getting us together to do it. Because I've got a lot of people that want the advice that I've given. They've told me they want to hear the different advice, but they can't always make my scheduled times, which is another reason why I do some other freelance kind of broadcasts that aren't on my schedule right now. I will probably revamp my schedule several times before I'm completely done with it. Like once we start opening things back up and I go out to play D&D again, my schedule will change because my D&D schedule will interrupt it. And I will want to play Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, and so I'll have to move my shows to other times. Once my girlfriend goes back to work, she's working from home right now. Once she goes back to work and I have more access to our Wi-Fi here at home, and I can't always use the Wi-Fi because of the fact that she's working, and she's supposed to have exclusive use of the Wi-Fi because it's needed for her work. So most of the time, if I stream during her work time, I'm using my phone as a hotspot, so I can't do as much. But when things go back to more normal and she goes back to the office to work, then a lot of times I will have shows during the day, perfect for people who are wanting to just listen to a Twitch broadcast or podcast during the day, like while they're working, or while the kids are at school or something of that nature. So at that time, we might have my whole schedule is going to change again. So look forward to that. That's what we're hoping to get. Right now, I've got 3 days of the week actually scheduled out. Let me bring in my schedule page again so you can see it a little bit better. Actually, 4 days a week, because Mondays and Wednesdays I have my Nostalgia Gaming channel show where from 10 to midnight I stream a game. And mostly I'm streaming older nostalgia games like Final Fantasy X, Dark Cloud. Yesterday I did Ape Escape 2. I've done Elder Scrolls Online or Guild Wars 2 or EverQuest. These are the kind of games that I stream for that. And some of them are from the PlayStation 4 and some are from the computer. It just depends on where I have them at as to which games I'm streaming. And so I do a couple hours or more because sometimes I'll run over of streaming. I do them Mondays and Wednesdays because I do not have dialysis early in the morning on Tuesday or Thursday, so I can sleep in. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I get up at 4:20 in the morning to go to dialysis. So I don't want to necessarily stay up past midnight on those days, although I have. But I don't want to do anything with a regular schedule because then I end up going to dialysis exhausted, which could cause some other detrimental things like random muscle spasms and stuff as I'm sitting there in the dialysis chair. So I don't do that. But anyway, that's Mondays and Wednesdays. Tuesday's my busiest day because we first have this RPG College today uh, with the open forum like we did, where in this case I rambled about challenge ratings quite a bit. And that's from 6 to 8 p.m. Then I take a quick 30-minute break, chance to go to the bathroom, get some to drink, close my eyes for a second. Then I'm simulcasting Left Wing Studios, which is my buddy Lurch and his buddy Angel. They run what's called Left Wing Studios, where they do some, streaming, and also they do some recorded videos, video blog type stuff in the nerd community. They're now streaming twice a week, um, Tuesdays and Saturdays. No, Tuesdays and Sundays, excuse me. They're doing Tuesdays and Sundays. Unfortunately, their Sunday is, well, my girlfriend is currently working because she's currently working on Sundays. So I can't simulcast their Sunday show right now, which runs like from 2 to 5 because my girlfriend is working till about 4:15, 4:30. But I do simulcast their Tuesday show from 8:30 to 11 p.m. This is where they're usually going to be playing a PS4 game on their stream. Right now they're doing, I think it's Last of Us. And they're streaming to YouTube and Facebook Live. And then I go ahead and piggyback them over here to Twitch. So they got 3 venues. And on my venue, I can take any comments in the chat and go over to where they're monitoring and let them know so they can answer you guys' comments. But also I can kind of give them a little Mystery Science Theater 3000 kind of treatment, and we can have some fun and some laughs too, because they're going to be joking around and laughing as well, so, and they already know it and they're okay with it, and so we're just having some fun for 3.5 hours, and so that's coming up here in just a little over a half an hour, and that's my Tuesdays, and then finally Saturdays I just started a new show. It's only had 2 episodes. Still building an audience for it. Just all of mine are still building an audience. I mean, I've had as many as 7 or 8 people in the channel for some of my shows. It's just getting them there, and I actually get more people watching when I'm streaming my alpha test of Fractured MMO, and that next alpha test will come up. And I hadn't mentioned yet, but when I am alpha testing Fractured, that usually supersedes Nostalgia Gaming on Mondays and Wednesdays. Instead, I'll keep alpha testing. But it doesn't supersede any other show. Might supersede Quarantine Karaoke. I'm not sure yet. But the Quarantine Karaoke Show is just a variety show where I sing to karaoke tracks on YouTube. I may play other YouTube videos that amuse me, very, very comedic, parody, nerdy videos, songs like Talk Nerdy to Me and I Kissed a Nerd, um, and Geek and Gamer Girls, uh, or Weird Al Yankovic or Ray Stevens or Cletus T. Judd songs. I'll play those. I'll also play some stuff like for upcoming nerdy things. Like I played the preview for the new PlayStation 5 last week. I played the preview for the D&D live broadcast that'll start this Thursday. And I actually wanted to play that broadcast on this show today before we got done. So let me cue that up. And let's see, we want D&D live. We want the D&D live event. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and run this. See, where's the actual preview? I want to make sure I've got the. Here's trailer number 2. We're going to run this trailer.
Do you like games?
Okay. I'm not going to start it yet because I want to start it from the very beginning first. It's a great little trailer, and I do want to expand it so you can see it better. So I'm going to go into my host screen, and I'm also going to even expand the window further so you can see a little bit better. And I'm going to play this for you. And definitely tune into it. This Thursday, Friday, and Saturday will be D&D Live. They do it once a year to introduce the new campaign stuff for their Adventures League and the new direction of the company every year, just to kind of keep everybody up to date. So I'm going to start this now for you, and that should probably play us out for the end of the episode.
Do you like games?
I never said I didn't.
Yes, my lord.
I'm up for anything, really.
Hodor.
Let's play a game.
Wait, that's who I'm DMing?
I'm making my character like Viserion, very excited, and I'm going to start training up for it.
Push-ups, pull-ups, dips, that real monk stuff.
It's not all about brawn, man. Got to be able to think your way through problems. Not like Ramsay Bolton, probably. Not going to be very useful.
As an actor, and in D&D, you enter the story.
Playing this game that, you know, really, I think facilitates connection and empathy.
We can connect around the world and still find like so many things in common. It's amazing to see like, you know, so many people come play this game they love.
We got sucked into this fairy world.
They would like guide us like in this mystery forest.
I beat some awesome monster with some cool sword that I made up.
It works more times than you would think.
D&D is about coming together with people you love and telling a story.
Your brothers and your sisters coming together to save the day.
And now we can do it for real with Red Nose Day.
Join us and let's save the day.
All right, that was.
This is gonna be really fun.
All right, that was the D&D live.
games?
Don't want it to do it again, but that was the D&D live preview. Hope everybody gets a chance to tune in for it. I'm going to go ahead and shrink my window back down a little bit so that you can see my ugly mug again, because I'm going to need to set this up for my simulcast so that I can put the simulcast in this window here and show you how they're playing. I usually stretch it to about there for that, and we're good to go. But thank you for those who did view. Like I said, I did have my one Phantom viewer through most of this. I'm not sure who that is, if it is really a person or if it's counting something else. It's not counting me, because I do sometimes see a 0 there. And there are times when I'm actually viewing from more than one window. So it's not me that's the phantom viewer. It could just be somebody who puts it on in the background, some kind of monitoring spider or something through Twitch. Who knows? They never say hi, so I can't really tell. But it's nice when I get a few people. And of course, this is going to be recorded and put on YouTube within the next 7 to 10 days. So all my talking, my throat raw won't have gone to waste. But anyway, thanks for joining. We're going to go ahead and shut off now. Now make sure, as you can see, I do support Extra Life on my stream. Extra Life is part of the Children's Miracle Network. It's an excellent charity for children with chronic conditions like cancer, end-stage renal disease, child onset diabetes, cerebral palsy, and things of that nature. They're often kept away from other children in special wards and stuff, and they don't get a lot of the chance to do as many things as our kids do. And the Extra Life puts money into a fund for your local area. It doesn't go to a big national fund, so it will help your local area. And in my case, my particular campaign goes to the Cox Network here in Springfield, Missouri, and you can donate to that, and it's an excellent cause. And if you look below my video on my Twitch page, you should see a donation link, or if you hit exclamation Extra Life in channel, if my bot's working right now, yes, my bot will tell you how to get to my page, and you can go there and you can donate. And I've got a very modest goal of just $1,000 by the end of the year. I'd love to push that slider further than that. I'd like to see nerds come together and really support this. Now, November 7th, I believe is going to be game day for Extra Life, when a lot of us streamers will be doing marathon streams of games for Extra Life. And on or around the 7th, I plan to do something. I don't know if I'll be able to do a 24-hour stream, which is what a lot of people try, but I'm going to at least do an 8 to 16-hour stream, maybe with a couple meal breaks in there of something. Maybe even Fractured MMO will be doing an alpha test, and I can stream out Fractured for the whole time. Or maybe I'll play Final Fantasy X through as far as I can go. Or we'll see something. But anyway, if you can support Extra Life, please do. I do want to thank everybody for showing up. I'm going to go ahead and log us off now. The stream should auto-direct you to one of my raid or hosting channels until I'm ready to come back on in. I'm going to be back on in less than 30 minutes. So I'll see you then.